George DiGianni, Train Station Fitness Show. In the studio with me is Coach Mo.
Good morning, George.
Morning, pal. So, the show we're discussing today is one that was an impromptu idea from a caller who called in a few weeks ago, Jack, on another show that we had, and he had some really good input, and so we connected after the show and decided that it would be a really good idea to bring to the attention of everyone the importance of identifying an addiction.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is not going to be an addiction show where we're talking about drugs and alcohol or limiting to drugs and alcohol. This is a show where we're discussing addiction, the definition of it, identifying it, especially if you're a parent, and recognizing whether your child is addicted to gaming. Well, they like it a whole lot, but are they addicted? And is it so terrible if they're addicted? Come on, they're not on the street, Mo. They're not getting into trouble.
Right.
But who does it hurt?
Correct.
So we really need to get into identifying it. What can be done about it? Is there a time for intervention? Are you addicted to exercise? Are you addicted to eating well? I mean, when we look at eating well, for people who are over the top and eating perfectly and can't stray from that, is that an addiction? And is it so terrible? I don't know. And that's why I thought it'd be nice to have Jack come on the show today. Jack, good morning to you. Is he there? Jack's from the ranch at Dove Tree in Lubbock. And let's see. Addiction is a chronic, often relapsing brain disease that causes compulsive behavior. So when we talk about addiction, and this is something he wrote. I didn't write it. And I thought that was real interesting. It's a relapsing brain disease.
Right.
Relapsing brain disease. That is hard to wrap my mind around because I don't see it as a disease. I see it as something someone is missing, where they have a desire to hold on to something that fulfills them, that tries to fill a void.
Correct.
I don't see it as any type of brain disease. Not that it's not, but I struggle with that. And then it says that causes compulsive behavior, which to me follows nicely. Jack, are you there?
Yes, George, I'm here.
Good morning. So, is it too early for you?
No, it feels great to be here. I'm excited to talk. Yeah, I've just got a golf game later this morning in Lubbock, so it's good to be on.
Okay, so golf is your main priority today. Is that your addiction?
You could say I shifted over to the driving range. That's right.
There you go. So one of the things that you wrote, and I was just talking with Mo about, and then it's kind of hard to wrap my mind around, is where you said addiction is a chronic, often relapsing brain disease. How is it a disease?
George, instead of fixating on the disease component, I am totally okay with us talking about addiction as a condition that brings about, as we said, compulsive behaviors and destructive consequences. I'm not the kind of person who wants to sit on the disease component for too long. I think that you can study diabetes or cancer along with addiction and see similarities with disease components. There are aspects to addiction where, for instance, the individual may not know that they are ill. And that may sound funny because, if somebody's gaming every day and absolutely obsessed with it, then they should probably know that that's an issue.
So let's talk about how addiction begins. And I don't want to limit this. I was telling Mo when we were off the air, I don't want to limit this to any drugs or alcohol. Let's just talk about addiction and blanket all addictions for a moment. How does it begin?
I think innocently. If you took somebody who overexercises, overeats, or does gaming too much, it might start very lightly. Somebody recognizes some joy in being online or playing a video game, and then they start to notice that without that in their lives, they feel a void. And so They might pick up their activity level. They might increase it. Perhaps they've received validation for it. For once, they might be good at something. And then they start missing obligations, or they start making excuses. So I think it really starts lightly. And by no means do I think anyone just picks up a video game or picks up an exercise habit and is at risk for any sort of dangerous level, you know?
Is there a certain personality that tends to have more addictive behaviors than others?
I've seen very intense people, you know, sort of by their nature, they're high-strung. In my office, that kind of suggests to me that idea of an addictive personality. However, you know, I've met just as many people who are just sort of relaxed, and then they find something that really wakes them up, so to speak, and that's what sort of they get into. So this idea of an addictive personality, it exists, but I promise you, just from my office experiences, it's not just one type of person who ends up getting treatment for addiction.
Interesting. Jack, have you ever dealt with, I'm sure you have, but when you have someone with a negative addiction to food or to drugs or alcohol or something like that, and you see that they have that tendency, do you ever try to maybe shift it to something positive? Because if they have that, quote, tendency or that nature to be addictive, shift it to something positive. Like I know a lot of people, or not a lot of people, but I know of people that were addicted to drugs or alcohol, and then they found exercise, and that became their new addiction. And although they may have done it in excess, it was a bit healthier for them.
Yeah, I can see that. You know, so that theory is known as harm reduction. So you would take something that is rather dangerous, say drugs or I don't know, something else that's really ugly, causes lots of consequences, can potentially put the person in jail or a hospital, and you shift it toward something less dangerous. My hope for a lot of my clients is not to just shift to something less dangerous, but to help them build the idea of balance as well as this idea of acceptance, so that they don't have to feel like they have to get their way every day with something in their lives.
So do you believe, I have this strong belief just from dealing with people for so many years, that there are certain people who just cannot control having an addictive mindset. This is maybe more going back to that disease state earlier that I mentioned, where they're just out of control and they need something to focus on, and it winds up being that's their new addiction. And so we often see a lot of people who go through drug and alcohol rehab, they find a religion that works for them. And now that's their new addiction. That's all they can talk about and focus on. And it's not a terrible thing by any means.
Right.
But what I've learned through the years, and tell me if I'm wrong, Jack, is that we all have a minimum of 3 addictions. Have you heard that? Do you subscribe to that thought?
I remember you saying that a couple weeks ago, and I had not actually heard that before in anything that I've, been taught or read. It can make sense to me. However, I know a lot of people who have a lot of balance, so I just feel like I'm not sure really where that comes from or what that is about. So.
It was a psychologist who shared that with me, and I guess it wasn't her opinion, a paper that she had read and been in this field for quite a number of years. And I don't know if it's true or not, but when I look at myself and being introspective about my past and where I've been, because you talk about that intense person tends to have an addictive behavior. I had a very, very addictive way of living. It was never the drugs or alcohol. I've never done drugs in my life, and I started drinking alcohol at 30, and I only have 1 drink a year, if that now. I mean, I just don't care for it. It's not my addiction. But mine used to be exercise. That was my focus, my addiction. Playing the drums, martial arts. Then it was, as I get older, it was everything to do with learning as much as I can, and I'm a voracious reader. And you say, well, George, how is reading an addiction? When I say you, let me use myself. When I get into a place where I'm so focused on whatever that new addiction is, and it's not like they're ever changing, but we'll talk about reading. I don't answer phone calls that come in, right? I miss appointments with friends. Maybe I don't go to the gym because I'm so focused on whatever that addiction is, and that is reading. I get so engrossed in it, I can't leave it alone. I get all these ideas, and I write things down, and work is my addiction. Work has always been my addiction. And so I guess it kind of, I'm wondering, how can we have that healthier addiction, if you will, but also have balance when someone just doesn't recognize? I think that's the thing that goes through my mind the most, Jack, is if someone doesn't recognize they have addictive behavior where they are pushing everything and everyone else aside for that addiction.
Yeah, how can we recognize then what to do, or
how do we recognize that we're in the midst of it, that we're in the throes of it?
What are the first signs that, okay, maybe I'm doing this a little bit too much?
Sure. So initial signs, let's take internet compulsivity. If you or if any person sort of wakes up in the middle of the night and has to look over their news feed online, they have to check their email, and they're missing sleep. I mean, there's a perfect example of, like, that is not a normal human behavior. Now, if you're waiting for big news of a job promotion, or you need to hear back from someone regarding the loss of a loved one, that's different. But what we're talking
Chalk
about,
up another one for me.
It's just early signs being, is there compulsivity involved? Are there consequences involved? Are other people concerned? And do you sort of, when faced with an intervention from somebody, and I just mean like a kind statement from a loved one, we're concerned about you, George, do you react defensively? Because if there's no problem, we shouldn't react defensively. That's my theory.
Yeah, because denial is usually the first part of that you do have an addiction.
Right. So if I have to minimize my actions, then I'm in hot water.
Right.
But if I can be honest a little bit and say, that's fairly on point. I do need to decrease my obsessiveness or whatever. I should work on balance. Maybe seeing a therapist would help with that. But I think you're onto something, George, that it's like some people are just really high strung and really intense and really like what they like,
So you're at the ranch at Dove Creek in Lubbock. Let me give the phone number out for anyone who may want to contact you guys. 800-218-6727. So coming up next, I want you to be specific, and let's talk about specific addictions as well. I want you to speak to families or to parents who have children that play video games. I'm not saying we shouldn't play video games. As a matter of fact, there's been great studies showing that children who play video games have a more innovative way of living their life, more innovative ways of figuring out problems because of playing video games. So there's certainly positives to it, especially which ones they're playing, right? But how can an adult recognize a child who's just gone over the top and what they can begin to do about it? How do they intervene where the child doesn't feel overwhelmed and want to rebel?
With that and with cell phones.
Well,
cell phones and iPads.
So the gamut of all of that, right?
Absolutely.
But that's just one. Let's pick a couple of addictions. Let's talk about exercise. Mo, you are a triathlete. There are friends of yours who are an Ultraman.
Right.
All right. I think that's over the top. That's addictive behavior. That's not healthy behavior. I'm just going to go there and just be that guy. How does someone recognize it's one thing to be healthy and do this and to have a focus? And I know we kind of discussed it when you start pushing people and other things aside, but is there something specific about the addiction that we can identify?
Right.
And I don't mean us, the people who are addicted. I mean those who are on the outside. And then what specifically can they begin to do for that person? Because that person is not going to want help.
Right, of course.
Oh, come on, I'm exercising. I'm doing something healthy. Leave me alone. That's being defensive.
But at what point does that become a detriment to your health and your family?
And that's a very good point.